welcome to another Faith and Prejudice broadcast. This is our August broadcast, and I'm so excited to have the guest that we have with us today. In light of recent developments of clergy burnout and fatigue, and also just kind of like the ebbs and flows of concerns as it's related to racial justice and racial equity, we thought that this was a very important conversation to have. Today, I am pleased to have the Reverend Dr. Benita Lewis, who is an executive pastor at Elon Baptist Church in North Carolina, and she is also a licensed clinician. Reverend Lewis, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Imani.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, truly a godsend that I came across your work at such a timely moment. Reverend Lewis, if you wouldn't mind, just give us an overview just of your journey to ministry and also to counseling as well.
Well, Imani, it's very simple. Simple, and it's been a complex journey all at the same time. I am a PK. I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in the church, always participating, always present. The church has always been a part of my life. I can literally describe only 3 months of my entire whole life journey where I was not affiliated or a part of the a congregation. So I had 3 months of my life where I said I'm not going. And during that 3 month period, I had my mother who was in my ear every day. You need a church home. I tell you, you need a church home. So literally, I was harassed through those 3 months and ended up coming back to the church. So it's in my blood. It's in my DNA. To say the least, I accepted the call to ministry. Not long after my father died. My father died in 2000, and I did my initial sermon in 2003 at a African Methodist Episcopal church in Maryland, and so that's where I accepted the call to ministry. And then not long after that, went to seminary. I was always drawn to pastoral care and counseling, and I knew I was drawn to that work, but did not want to go back to school yet again. But as I started working in our family business, which is a child development center in the Congress Heights area of Southeast Washington, D.C., I realized that many of the individuals that I felt called to serve had been traumatized. And that trauma meant that I needed to do some deeper study, and it was needed to be addressed with more than prayer. I needed an actual education in counseling as well as the certification. And so I did go back and earn a master's degree in counseling and also a PhD. So that's how I got to this space, understanding the call for that, as well as understanding that people, just in my prior life when I was an educator, just as people needed to see faces like mine in an educational arena, they need to see faces like mine in a counseling arena.
That's very powerful, very powerful. And where you got your PhD in rehabilitation counseling was also at a historically Black college.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Um,
Um,
the first historically Black college with an accredited counseling program at that level. Mhm.
Wonderful, wonderful. I wanted to call that out because that is, again, connected to what you mentioned about representation.
Yes.
Um, so let's get into this lovely dissertation that I picked up, I put down, I picked it up, I put it down, but it was just so rich, so rich. Um, so your dissertation entitled "A Case Study of the wellness practices of Black pastors providing emotional support from the front lines. You capture this aspect of wellness as self care as a sustainable intervention for pastors. Why was it important for you to explore this issue? And also, why is it still relevant today in light of, let's say, a return to business as usual or things, like opening up?
Well, I find that it was necessary because for so many people of color, having access, first of all, to mental health and knowing where to go was essential. And although the role of the Black pastor has shifted, it is still a role that holds a great deal of influence.
Mm,
And so we find ourselves even looking at pastors as individuals who may be frontline. They're the first people to help people deal with trauma. If someone dies, if there's a violent death, if there is a hospitalization or what have you, the pastors in many communities of color are the first individuals that get that information.
mm,
And so, as well as when things go really amok in families,
mhm,
families come to the pastor, whether it be sexual trauma, whether it is substance abuse, they come to the pastor and they're trying to get information about where do we go. So even at times, pastors are gatekeepers. They may not necessarily sit there and do the actual counseling, but they are sometimes the gatekeeper or the bridge to
mhm,
formal counseling services for many
mhm,
families.
mhm, mhm. And that's very, very true. Even considering like my upbringing, and also just like what the data, shares in terms of mental health, that part of representation is key, but then also the comfortability, that, folks won't be judged, you know. And even as you shared, maybe the role of the Black pastor has shifted from what it was years ago, but I thought that it was important to highlight that you noted to me when we spoke, um, that we have a non-traditional approach of support, right? In traditional Black churches, and that includes sitting with that person of wisdom. I thought that that was so pertinent that you shared that, like sitting with that person of wisdom, of sound counsel. Um, why do you think that that's the case, like in a traditional Black setting? And have you noticed any generational differences, since you have been in ministry, with who's seeking out support when things happen?
Well, the research does shed as it relates to that generational divide. Um, Younger individuals are not as married to family churches or to denominations as older individuals tend to be.
Mhm,
Okay. My mother will tell me to the end, I'm Baptist, Baptist bred. I'm going to die in the Baptist tradition. And so that is very important for many older Christians. Whereas for some many younger Christians, it is, I need a word. I need a
mm,
word today, and wherever I can get the word that sustains me for what I need right now, I'll go. I'll get online. I'll drive an hour down the road to a church that may not have people that look like me in the pulpit, but I'm going to sit there and wherever I can get a word. And so people tend to be more open. Their younger people also tend to be more open to get support in a formal setting, i.e., from counselors, licensed counselors, social workers, psychiatrists, etc. So that the research does say that.
mm,
However,
mm,
there is a place when our younger individuals experience uh, things like
Mm-hmm.
George Floyd situation, and it's not addressed in a multiracial congregation, or when they experience microaggressions in the
Yeah.
workplace,
Yes.
where do I who will
Correct.
resonate or help me walk through this trauma?
Hmm.
And let me say, not only microaggressions, I want to say macroaggressions as well.
Yes.
So we have that, and then when the matriarchs of our families or
Hmm.
patriarchs die,
Hmm.
are you going to give me the same support that many times we see in traditional Black churches, where there is this person that will help walk with you through the whole preparation of the funeral, the preparing, the organization of it, to who to call, what to do? So it's those times we see our younger brothers and sisters coming back to more traditional and getting that support in the traditional church.
That is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. And also great for those that are, tuning in to even decipher the distinction between the generations, whether you were leading a predominantly Black congregation or a multiracial congregation. Very, very important to note. You also say in the study, which I thought, again, with recent developments, as of lately, with those that are choosing to leave, I would say clergy, right? A clergy position. The emotional support of Black pastors makes them susceptible to work overload, burnout, and compassion fatigue. You go on to state that Black pastors must address the impact of cultural trauma, of racism, and discrimination. So the past few years, things have been on high display, even as things are even going on this year, right? There may not, it's like they may make a little bit of the headline and then it may fade. But the past couple of years, it was really, really prominent. The Black pastors that you worked with and that were part of your study, they still, in light of this work overload, burnout, and compassion fatigue, they still chose to incorporate social justice in their sermons.
Yes.
Why do you believe they chose to do that? Because I know, and we have even heard, there's pastors who may feel ill-equipped to address, what's going on in the world, or may feel like they either don't know what to say or that it's not a place to say it in the sermon.
Well, all of the pastors that were in my study, because I had the opportunity to participate, and it was during COVID. So normally, my plan when I originally did my research was to go to work church and worship at these pastors' churches. However, due to COVID, I had to participate virtually. And in that participation, I found that there was not one church that did not, either through an announcement of some sort or in the sermon, where either COVID-19 was not addressed, voter suppression, or the circumstance related to the death of George Floyd or the murder of George Floyd. So they dealt with it, period. It was either through something that was going on and as an announcement that you needed to look forward to and make sure you participated, or there was a preached word from the pulpit related to this. So they did not feel that they could get around it. They felt that they had to address it. And I want to go back to something you said, that the church is open back up and is going back to business as usual. We will never be the church that we were pre-pandemic.
Mm,
That is over. So we are now supporting churches and pastors because some churches have died. If they did not make the leap to have a virtual presence, online presence, those churches are dying or have died. And so that is a whole nother can of worms that we have to address.
Yes, I mean, I've even seen it, like even when I'm going to service on Sundays, I'm not necessarily seeing, because my church is open, it is in person, even though there is streaming online, I'm not seeing people in the streets as I did before, you know. Um, I will say the digital presence of service has made things more accessible, which is great. Um, but then in terms of like the physical gathering place, and I believe that's what
Right.
you're speaking to, it has shifted. It has truly shifted. And it's unfortunate, yet I believe as a church body, right, that we have to be very innovative with how we still spiritually feed our communities, our families, in light of the change that has happened as a result of the pandemic.
Even our preaching language has had to change.
Mm,
It used to be touch your neighbor and say,
mm,
um,
yes,
give your neighbor a holy hug. And
yes,
all of these ways that we've shown up previously have shifted.
yes. And thank you for bringing that up, Reverend Lewis, because there was actually another pastor that we were in conversation with that said that, the impact and the effect on, just being in leadership as a pastor, a lot of that, high touch, engagement that is associated with being a minister is not the same anymore, or it's just gone in some spaces. So that has also impacted the mental health of pastors, right? And then also just for them to feel like they are in community with their congregation, with that aspect not there as it was before.
And the call and response of the
Yes,
church,
yes,
that's very different now. And think about the struggles that those pastors experienced when church was closed and they had to produce a certain level of how do I want to say it, a certain level of spiritual connectedness, and the congregation was not there to do the call and the response. And in many black churches or churches of color, there is this energy and this flow of going back and forth. And here we had black pastors or pastors of colors standing before empty pews, having to produce this high level, high energy sermon without that yin and yang, that going back and forth, that flow.
correct, correct. Wow, wow, yes. Feels very lonely and
Yes.
isolating for sure. Wow. Um, so connected to your research, came across this other research article entitled "Where Would You Go? Race, Religion, and the Limits of Pastor Mental Health Care and Black and Latino Congregations." It's written by Daniel Boulder and Pamela J. Prickett. They found that both Black and Latino Christians prefer seeking spiritual resources, like their pastor, when dealing with mental health issues, even though the pastors feel limited in their ability to help their congregants. They argue, similar to you, that if pastors remain at the forefront of providing mental health care in many racial, ethnic minority communities, a conclusion that's supported by their results, then equipping pastors to better fill these roles is imperative for providing adequate care. So, pastors that lead congregations that are predominantly people of color, they were already dealing with issues before the pandemic.
Yes.
It was exacerbated during the pandemic, right? And only God knows where we're going to be in the upcoming months, right? So from your perspective, Reverend Lewis, what do you think is needed in the public health space and also the philanthropic sector in light of this research and these growing developments?
Well, I think it is imperative that pastors not only arm themselves with a Bible in one hand, but it has been said, but a newspaper or information or social media in the other hand. I think it's imperative that pastors have the scripture as the Holy Writ, as well as what is going on not only in their communities but globally. I think it is imperative that pastors arm themselves with that information first and foremost. Then I think it's important for pastors to do have a level of reflection, because it's important that you be able to say that is beyond my scope. And you need to be able to say that to your congregants when they sit down with you. The first thing I am constantly saying to pastors, if a congregant comes to you with an issue more than 2 to 3 times, it is time to refer them to someone else. You need to know when to refer. You need to know what resources are available so that you can stir your congregants or community members in the right direction. I think that's the beginning part of equipping. I don't know that pastors want to be social workers. I felt called to be a licensed counselor. I don't know, pastors want a pastor.
Mhm.
And pastoring, while it has levels of counseling sewn into it, is not all counseling. And so I think we have to equip them where they are, give them resources, community resources as to whom to refer, and to help them set boundaries with their client, with their, not clients, with their congregants and the community that says, you're going down that road. I don't have, that's not my level of expertise. I need to send you over here. Or I
Yeah.
need to take down your name and phone number, your email address, and I need to get back to you.
Mm. Wow. Wow. So knowing when to delegate, setting those boundaries, also being well equipped with information, right?
Yes.
And I'll even say, knowing your community partners, like knowing those resources that are available outside of the scope of what it is that you're able to deliver on. Very, very important. Very important. Now, for white pastors or pastors that are not necessarily leading congregations that are majority, like racial minorities, what are some frontline lessons from the pastors that you worked with, you were in community with, who stood and continue to stand in the gap in light of their own fatigue when racial injustice happens?
I think the first thing we have to do for our white sisters and brothers who are in ministry is to not assume that they don't have a struggle, because I believe that what they're facing now is tremendous. It's almost paramount to the Civil War time, when families had individuals who fought for the Confederacy and some for the Union Army. Because there's such a divide, not only in the United States politically and as far as religious beliefs and social beliefs are concerned, there are divides within families, there are divides within marriages. And so my white sisters and brothers in ministry have are the pastors of the people who are divided. And so we must lift them in prayer, and they must also seek um, counseling, as well as to know when to set those boundaries, and to also stand on the premises of love and what they believe. They've got to seek their hearts, search their hearts, and stand on what they believe, and take a stand. And that stand may be totally counter to their congregations with whom they pastor. So everyone has issues that they're struggling to manage as pastors.
That is very, very interesting. That even, white pastors have a stake in this,
Yeah.
right? Even with the polarization. Thank you for pointing that out, because that's even given me new perspective as well. Um, I'm wondering, when you say set boundaries, that is hard. In general, when you are in mission-based work, right? And especially when you are responding to the call to ministry. Um, Sometimes people need the tools to actually communicate when the no is a no, when a yes is a yes. So without, I would say, like, the interventions and intentional pieces of self-care, that can be a little bit of a challenge for pastors, who, if they don't embody and really take into account wellness, they're at risk to be impacted physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. Um, it impacts their congregation, but it also impacts their home and their families. To those who may be experiencing that fatigue right now, because we know that it's true, there's a lot of people that are questioning their next steps in ministry. What are some practices that your pastors, the pastors that were in your study, employed, and what has been helpful to you as a pastor?
Okay. I think it's also important to mention here, Imani, that pastoring is not the vocation that it once was.
Mm,
There was a time that pastors died pastoring. Pastors are leaving the work of pastoring by the droves. So it is not the same as it once was. So I think it behooves pastors to be intentional and regular about their self care. It cannot be something that they address, you know, later down the road, or once they've already are emotionally tapped. It must be something that is done proactively and on the front end. And if people don't do it on a regular end, like you said, all of these areas will be impacted. The pastors had very unique ways. So one of the things that my research told me is that pastors who look at ministry and worship from a team perspective, tend to have healthier ideas about self-care. Ministers who look at it from ministry from it's all about, I got to do everything. I do the prayer, I do the announcements, I do the ones that do all of the pieces of the worship experience, tended to have uh, less intentional self-care practices. That's what I found. So, for those pastors who were very intentional, one pastor said she holds benediction from Sunday after church until Tuesday at 11 a.m. Her
mm,
congregants know that unless there's a death in the congregation,
mhm, mhm.
we talk to someone else in leadership in the church. We'll talk to pastor after 11 a.m. on Tuesday morning.
Wow. Wow.
Again, setting the boundary.
Exactly. Exactly.
One pastor who had a congregation of well over 400 congregants said mental health Monday. Monday is his mental health day. And he said he had to talk to himself because he felt guilty about doing nothing. Literally, there are pastors walking around that feel guilty about doing nothing or doing what they want to do. So that's a whole mindset of, feeling more comfortable doing what I want to do and saying, like you said, saying, no, this is my day of Sabbath. Because obviously the pastors can't use the Lord's Day, Sunday, as their day of Sabbath because they are working.
Mm.
Someone also talked about getting help, getting additional help, allowing the lay to serve and support. Also, one participant said she uses seminarians to come in and help to support by doing some of the Bible studies or helping in other areas of the church. So those are all some of the ways that some of the pastors talked about. Somebody talked about enjoying gardening, doing that again, doing what I want to do that helps free my mind and make me feel, more clear about my life
Yeah.
and how I show up.
Yes. Wow. Wow. So I'm going to repeat back what I heard you say, just to make sure that all of those are able to capture it. Um, creating like this time, where there's no communication unless it is something very, very urgent, being able to communicate that and it be delegated for some other persons in leadership to respond to. A mental health Monday. Also heard allowing others to serve, who may not necessarily be in leadership, but maybe they're seminarians or volunteers, to step up, and also doing something that you enjoy, which you know it tends to we tend to forget that, like when we're just going, finding and re-engaging with that thing that you enjoy. That, yes, I know Reverend Lewis, even before, like have the Bible in one hand, but also have that thing that you enjoy in the other hand. Be committed to that as well for your own balance and wellness. um, any closing thoughts or you know like words of encouragement, Reverend Lewis?
Well, one thing I do want to say to pastors is step away from being super spiritual. Sometimes we spiritualize everything. Well, yes, God is everywhere, and God is concerned about all of our issues and what's going on in society. And on the other hand, being super spiritual, I pray, I read the Bible, I do this, I do that. These are all my ways of, I fast, I do this, I do that. Spiritual disciplines are wonderful, but what is your intent? If you're reading the Bible to formulate a sermon, or to formulate a Bible study, that's not necessarily intentionally reading that word to build you up spiritually and to help you with your self care and your support. If your prayers are all intercessory prayers where you're praying for the community and the congregants and all of the people who pull on you to pray, and you've never lifted a prayer about your wellness and the wellness of your spouse and the wellness of your family, what's the intent? And so I just beg my colleagues in ministry to take a moment to really be intentional and be regular about their self care so that it is not utilized as a spare tire in a car where you pull it out when you get a flat on the side of the road.
Mm. Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Reverend Lewis. We are going to include links to her dissertation in the comments. It is an enjoyable read. It's definitely very rich. So if you have any comments, feedback, you can feel free to reach out to us, reach out to Reverend Lewis directly. But we just want to thank you all for tuning in. We would like for you to stay encouraged. We hope that you're encouraged even by this broadcast. And also look out for our upcoming program initiative that we're hoping is going to fill a gap and fill a need of flourishing for pastors, both white pastors and pastors of color, beginning this fall. It's called the Refresh Cohort. So thank you all for your time, for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next month.